This is our Michigan State University beekeeping office hours for May. That's May 4th, 2026. I'm here with Dr. Zachary Wong, Dr. Keith Mason, Dr. Megan Milbrath, and Dan Wines, and I'm Anna Heck. And we are doing this program for MSU Extension, which has programs that are open to everyone. So we'll get started with some announcements. We'll have a plants and bloom update from Dr. Zachary Wong and a weather update from Dr. Keith Mason. And then we'll spend some time sharing what we're doing on our honeybee colonies and some beekeeping updates from our team. And then we'll respond to your beekeeping questions. So you'll be able to find the recording for this webinar on the extension website. So if you go to canr.msu.edu/bees, and then find the video button, we'll post the recording of tonight's webinar to the extension page. And then we also post the recording of the webinar to our YouTube channel. So if you go to the Michigan State University Beekeeping YouTube channel, you'll find our office hour webinar recordings, as well as lots of other webinar recordings. We compiled several different resources for beekeepers for months throughout the beekeeping season. And this is the link to our resources for May. So you'll find lots of links to pages that have information that's relevant to this time of year. Early registration is ending soon for the Heartland Apicultural Society Conference. We're really excited to be hosting it on campus, and we have a lot planned. It's going to, I think, be a really fun program. We're excited to host a conference in late May when we can hopefully have weather that's good for opening up hives. We have a lot of different keynote presentations from experts from outside of Michigan. We have Michigan beekeepers as well who are presenting several different tracks of information. And then we'll have in-hive classes and workshops. And then there's also some opportunities to sign up for laboratory workshops. So I think it's going to be a great program. There's going to also be some fun social events. We're really looking forward to it. Sign up for the conference sooner rather than later if you want to take advantage of the discounted pricing. Another conference that we're excited about hosting is called Healthy Habitats and Productive Pollinators. So this is a one-day in-person conference held in Flint on Thursday, June 18th, and its main focus is on our wide variety of different kinds of pollinators, especially bee pollinators that aren't honeybees. So we're looking a lot at our wild species of bees. Dr. Elaine Evans from the University of Minnesota will be the keynote presenter, and she's an amazing researcher who's done tons of work around especially bumblebees and does a lot of public education around bumblebees. And so I think this is going to be a really fun way for people to learn about lots of different bee pollinators. So hope you're able to join this if you're interested. And then we also just wanted to share that there are 4-H license plates that support MSU Extension, and this is the 1-year anniversary of those being released. So you're welcome to consider getting a 4-H license plate if that's something that you're interested in supporting. And then next we're going to go to Dr. Zachary Wong and his flower report. So these are flowers that are in bloom or recently in bloom around campus here.
Okay, thank you, Ella. So I realized that we have a webinar tonight, so I took a walk in the campus in the Beer Botanic Garden, and also drove to the landscape hot Arboretum 3 to 5 p.m. today. So pears and apples are mostly done, cherries also, I think. But of course, if you're in northern Michigan, maybe they still haven't started yet. There's a huge range of temperature gradient here, as Keith will tell you later. Uh, Still blooming near the end. Red buds have been blooming for about 2 weeks. Of dandelions, of course, started 2 or 3 weeks ago, but still I saw some near my neighbor's lawn. Grape hyacinth, I have that in my garden, and I saw honeybees working on them. Quince and crab apples, those are in the family of Rosaceae, rose family. They are mostly done. But choke cherry is almost done also. It's very confusing. There's another one called chokeberry, which is the genus Aronia, which is peak bloom right now. Hawthorn still peak blooming, and those should attract the honeybees. So I remember the chokeberry. I didn't have flowers or bees on flowers, even though I know the fruits and I have made beautiful wine using chokeberry. Special color and special fragrant flavor you could never get from grapes. So I took effort to wait for honeybees today. I was lucky. I saw 5 or 6 honeybees, and I think I got some good photos. There's red elderberry also blooming. I thought it was strange because out of the regular common elderberry in my backyard, they don't bloom until another probably 3 weeks or a month. So this is a different species, a red one, and they were blooming. I didn't have time to wait for honeybee there today, but it should be a bee-friendly plant because the other species has a lot of honeybees. Horse chestnut started blooming. I've seen bumblebees foraging on horse chestnuts, and there are, I think, maybe a species or two that produces toxic nectar, but most of the trees are okay. So Jacob's ladder, which is actually a native plant here in Michigan, that's sort of endangered, but people grow them. My wife used to grow them in our garden, but they spread crazy, and I think she got rid of them. And bloodlot, it's an interesting tree that in the MSU garden I saw a few other bees, but I might have honeybees foraging on it other years. I think I saw the glossy buckthorn blooming also, and honeybees would forage on it. It's actually quite common to find pollen of this species, even though it's invasive and it's said to be very bad for the ecosystem. But bees would take advantage of the nectar and pollen. Other blooming plants, white geranium, Virginia bluebells, those are good bee plants. And trillium, I didn't see any bees, but the white trillium, I think honeybees will forage. Mulberry male flowers, lots of them. I waited for bees, but maybe it's near the end. I did not see any bees. Sugar maple are blooming right now at the MSU campus. The sweet gum tree, which I did not realize could attract the honeybees. I saw some bees there foraging. I'm not sure if it's honeybees, very tall. Dutch maple, I saw possibly honeybees there. And lower maple was blooming 2 weeks ago, and I used my cell phone. I took pictures of it, and I should have gone back using my camera. I said, "Oh, I'll do it tomorrow," and then of course next day it was a different time, and I waited for half an hour, no honeybees. Uh, but I did get good pictures of honeybees on chokeberry and nutterberry. Choke cherry is also near the end, which is actually a prunus, same genus as edible cherry, Prunus virginiana or virginica. It actually has a slightly toxic component in the cherry, but you can make wine or make pie if you don't eat a lot. It's okay. It has a stringent taste because of tannin. Uh, Flower and dogwood, which I know is in honeybees, but I saw a lot of bees today. But the trees were tall. I have seen pictures on the internet of honeybees on flowering dogwood. Right now it's in top bloom. And I will blog soon about the chokeberry and nannyberry. So at bees.msu.edu. So I will give the time to Keith, realizing we only have so much time. I could spend an hour talking about flowers, but I don't want to take everybody else's time.
That was great. Thanks, Zach. All right, Keith, if it's okay, we'll turn it over to you now.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me again. Glad to be here. I'm the Enviro Weather Coordinator, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the weather here. We've had kind of some changes going on. So let me see where my controls are. Okay. So we'll start with the temperature just over the last week. Um, we definitely had cool temperatures. The picture on the left shows, the range of temperatures that we had. So it's from 35 or so to the 50s. But definitely lower than we're normally having at this time. If you look at the picture on the right, that shows us the amount or the temperature difference based or compared to what is normal or what the average would be. So in a lot of Michigan, we're in the green area, which means it's cooler than we normally see. And the white here is kind of towards the normal range. But so from normal to below normal, so overall cooler that this last week. If we look still at the monthly kind of average, um, we've got the same range of temperatures on the left, but on the right, you can see that we're still warmer than normal for the month. So even though we had this cool week last week, as far as development goes, we're still ahead, and this month was overall a warm month. And if we're looking at growing degree days or the heat units that we um, can accumulate over time that drives plant growth or insect development, uh, we since a month ago there in the south things have advanced quite a bit over a couple hundred growing degree days base 50, and so like Zach was saying, we're through bloom in a lot of the earlier fruit trees down in the southwest or approaching that. The cooler weather is slowed down bloom in some areas or for some crops, so it's extended out a little bit. um, so yeah, and in the right you can see that kind of the range, and up north is still lower growing degree days, but they've been warming up there. So they're starting to catch up. You can see that on the right hand side, these red areas are places where they're ahead of normal, essentially. And it's from a week to 2 weeks ahead of normal development in the southern range here, and then things are evening out in the north as well. I don't know if you recall the situation last time. It was behind normal in the north and above normal in the south. So that seems to be evening out a little bit here. Um, so that's it. Yeah, I guess it's just kind of what we see through the season, but it's happening early here with the warm up. And switching over to rainfall, on the left-hand side is the total amount of precipitation that we received over the past week. And the numbers here are from looks like 0.75 to an inch in some places. That's actually still below normal, and we can see that on the right-hand graph where the browns or are the areas that show us where we've had less rainfall than we normally would during this week, kind of in an average. And if we look at that kind of with the month perspective again, we've had a fairly wet month here. You can see all the blue here. That's kind of high rainfall events. And on the right-hand side, this is in respect to normal or compared to what the average would be. And we're still, we're 2, 3, 4 inches ahead of normal in the southern part of the state, and mostly above normal here in the UP as well. There do seem to be a couple of areas that are drying out, southeast Michigan as well. But generally, um, yeah, so it was overall that month was quite wet. Now, so here's part of the switch that we're seeing. This is a forecast of the rainfall that we'll see over the next week in Michigan. And these greens that are we're seeing up here, there's some dark greens, a little bit of blue, but mostly light green in Michigan. And that's low rainfall. So we're expecting to see in that quarter inch and below generally across the state. Might be higher in some areas, but that's overall for the week. So definitely a drying trend. Um, I actually, yeah, let me try this here. See which screen it comes up in. But this is just a forecast for which screen are you? You're this one. Let me choose. Drop this over here real quick. Does that show you a more of a weather map, a different weather map? Okay, so you can do a little loop on this. Let me make it some bigger. But what you'll see is come on. Okay, there we go. What you'll see is a cold front that's moving through. So we've got cold Canadian air that's pushing off the rain that we had recently, or any rain that we would have for um, this particular session. So this is the low or the light greens and somewhat darker greens that we're seeing, but that is running from let's see, late tonight, so very early Tuesday morning through Thursday. So this kind of gives us 12-hour looks of where things are. And the end of it there is pretty important because that's a high pressure area right up there at the top where there'll be clear skies and very little chance for rain in that. Um, Now let me see if I can just get back to my presentation here. Um, so yeah, so that's just a loop that it only goes out 2.5 days though is the problem. It's kind of the amount of forecast that we get for rainfall is a little bit limited. Um, so where are my controls now? Okay, there we go. So again, looking forward, we have these temperature and rainfall outlooks that give us a general idea of where we're going temperature wise, and for rainfall. But you can see on the left here, this is the next 6 to 10 days. So that's May 9 through 13 will be still below normal as far as the temperatures go. So not looking to warm up a heck of a lot. Um, and the precipitation also is no longer in the wetter phase like we were about a month ago for the past couple of months, but it's predicting that will be near normal. So no direction either way, whether it will be wetter or drier. So we call that just the near normal. And yeah, the 8 to 14 days look the same pretty much as that. And the trend is actually continuing for the month of May, which is what this shows. On the left-hand side, we've got the temperature outlook looks to be still a cool May, or kind of average overall will be a cooler May. It's probably a better way to say it. And then again, in the precipitation, it doesn't look like it's going to be wetter than normal or drier than normal. We're just kind of in the middle there with no direction. Um, and looking at the season overall, so later in the summer as well, to kind of look at a 3-month span, it looks like we will have not warmer than normal, but kind of back to the normal for the remainder of the summer. We might have warm periods in there that kind of bring up the average. So to have equal chances of being normal because we're cooler than normal now. We're predicting to be there. So so that is a kind of a net warm up for us, but doesn't look like it's going to be a super hot summer. And then again, precipitation, it's still looking like we're going to be normal throughout this period here too. Things can change, obviously. We've changed month from month already here. So, I'll be back around in June to see how things look. So we can talk about it then. Um, I wanted to talk a little, just a tiny bit here about where you can get soil data and wind data. Now, these are current measurements here. This is from our partner Synoptic Data, and I can put the link in the chat here when I'm done. And it might be you might have it from last time actually. But the left-hand side, this shows us the wind over Michigan based on the stations in our network. And you can actually view many networks on this same tool here. It has over 100 networks data come into this, so you can see things around the Midwest for sure, throughout the US, and there are even some European, Asian, and African sites that they have, and Australian as well too. So yeah, so just for getting that, where are we wind? And these were some pretty windy periods that we were having, gusts of 38 degrees and fairly constant too. Um, but then the soil, you can also get soil temperature and soil moisture from this same tool. And I wanted to just demonstrate it a little bit here. It's free to use. You can sign up for an account if you want, and then you can save some settings. Um, Okay, you're over here. So we should have a radar, a different map showing up with some um, with little cans on it, orange cans. So that what you guys see? Okay, good. So this is their map piece, or their map that shows data from many different areas. And down here in the lower left is where you can change over to whatever variable you want. You've got many to choose from. There's precipitation in here to look at, and you can check air temperatures. That was soil temperature that we had there just a second ago, but soil moisture also is available here. And in general, soils are very wet for Michigan, even this time of year here. But again, yeah, the radar goes over top, so you can kind of get a feeling for what's going on right now for your area. Now, another thing that I did want to talk about was wind forecasts, because it's nice to know what the wind is now, but you need to think about it in the future, other variables as well, obviously. But on our website, the homepage is a map that has dots of our stations. You can click on any dot and it will bring up this, what we call the station page that's centered on the station. And all the information that you would access from here would use data from the station. But there are forecasts down towards the bottom of towards the bottom of the station page that give you these weather forecasts. So it'd take me a sec to bring up our website real quick just to show you where to look. Okay, I thought I had this up already, sorry. Okay, so yeah, you can choose any of any station, and it takes you to that station page. You can bookmark this and save it and all that, but that's probably for another time. But to find out about detailed wind forecasts, it's at the bottom here. I'm going to make this a bit larger. But it's a few graphs, but once you take a look at them, you can see that their importance and they're all lined up for time. But the second graph down is the wind speed and wind direction graph. So it's got the wind direction bars on it. But for looking at what the wind speed is going to be for the next few days, actually, I think this goes out 7 days, if I'm correct. But there's a little button over here that you can just go through and forward 2 days with each time. So again, you're looking for the second graph down that has the wind forecasts in it. And this is the sort of forecast that we're going to incorporate into a tool for beekeepers as well. I think that was pretty close to what I had. Oh, let me make sure I tell you this. EnviroWeather now has an app. MABR put together we worked with them to get them a connection to our website, and so they've developed an app. I'll put this link to the announcement in the chat, but it's free. You can download it, set it up for your operation or what have you. If you have questions about it, you can certainly let me know. I'm not the one who did it, but I know a lot about it. That's for sure. Um, yeah, so I think we can skip the summary here too. And I'm going to add my slides in to, I guess, or send them to you, Anna, so that you can add them to this presentation. So folks will certainly have the links here as well too. All right, so I am done with that. I don't know if there is time for a question or if there are any.
That was great. It's really helpful to hear what the weather is maybe going to be doing and trying to, as we think about the beekeeping season. So if you do have questions about anything, so weather related
Yeah, I
or
see there is one in the Q&A. James was asking about whether the graph looks like Noah's. It it's the same data. Our data goes into NOAA. And we're partnering the synoptic data. They're one of our partners that handles the NOAA data. So basically, they've produced this website for networks that have their data on it. So that, and it's completely free. It is funded by NOAA. So yes to a lot of that, I think. But the wind forecast, totally. That's National Weather Service and NOAA. So that's straight from the crate there. Absolutely.
great. If you have more questions, please put them in the webinar Q&A box.
Mhm.
There are some requests for the synoptic weather data link as well to
Okay.
put in the
Yep.
chat.
I will add into the chat.
Thank
And the
you.
great job, someone saying great job, which I wholeheartedly agree with. I feel so lucky to have access to this.
Well, yeah, but if there's stuff that, you think I should add in, just let me know and I'll, figure out a way to do that. So that I can do.
Awesome. Thanks, Keith. So if you have more questions, please put them in the Q&A box. If you have questions outside of tonight's webinar, just a reminder that you can use the Ask Extension form. I wanted to share some of our funding acknowledgments. So we're appreciative to the sources that fund us to do programs like this. And if you have questions outside of the webinars, you can send them to us through the Ask Extension form. And now we're going to start with some beekeeping updates and more questions. So I'll ask Dan if you're willing to start just by sharing some of the beekeeping work that you've been doing or what you've been seeing in hives.
Yeah, so been pretty busy. This is always this late April, early May. I always think it was kind of peak chaos season. Trying to stay in front of the bees and work around the weather as it allows. Um, so been doing a lot of splitting with purchased mated queens from out of state. So making making up new units there and leaving, parent colonies taking a lot of their kept brood and bees away to kind of mitigate some of the swarming impulse, and then giving them space, giving them drawn comb back and getting supers on things. We had a real in the kind of Ingham County vicinity. We had couple days where dandelion nectar came in really strong about 2 weeks ago. It was warm, and then we kind of had this cold spell that we pulled out of today. There was really good nectar flow coming in today, but not much in between sort of the 10 days prior to today. Not a lot coming into hives. A little bit of pollen, but not much to speak of nectar wise. So I was feeding in some of the new colonies, the new units that are made up. Generally, if I install a queen, I give it a little bit of syrup. If there's not a nectar flow going on, and that can help with acceptance. And also because most of the splits I've made, I have left in the same yard for the time being. That means those colonies kind of lose all those foragers are oriented to the parent colony. So I've made a new unit in the same yard, and that's largely just young, kind of nurse bees in the colony, but not a lot of flight activity, even if the weather was favorable. So trying to stay in front of them, trying to keep enough space for them. They are growing, and then, fingers crossed for some warm days that coincide with all these flowers we're seeing in the landscape that, Zachary mentioned, there's a lot blooming right now. So just hoping for conditions that the bees can go get it.
Great. Megan, do you have anything to add?
No, my story is basically the same as Dan's, just trying to get out in the little gaps of the weather and doing splits as I can, and then making sure they're big enough. I think this season did feel like it. I mean, as Keith has mentioned and everyone has experienced, that we did have those warm days early that kind of put me in a panic. And then I was out, right before this meeting, and in these cold, they just kind of settled back in and are all just kind of sitting there waiting. So, but yeah, just lots of swarm control.
Great. Yep. Same with splitting bees here. So it looks like we have some good questions in the Q&A box. You want to get us
hmm
started?
Yeah, well, you can start with the first one. So there's a question about how long is it recommended to feed a new package 1-to-1 ratio of sugar water?
Great. So definitely when you start a package, it's a good idea to feed them sugar syrup, especially if you're starting them on foundation, because they'll need that as a food source. I like to continue feeding them for quite a while. You definitely want to stop feeding syrup when you're adding honey supers on, because you don't want sugar syrup to get into the honey supers. But as that new colony, especially if it's a colony that you've hived on foundation or that is trying to draw a lot of comb, it needs a lot of sugar to be able to draw that comb. And so feeding them for a while can be good, especially as that colony gets bigger. It might not have a large forager population to start with. If you get to a point where, the second box is on and they're bringing in lots of nectar, you could pull back on feeding syrup if you wanted to, or you could continue feeding until you put the super on.
Um, Dan, do you want to do the next one? So the question is, how many frames of honey from a dead out can be given at one time to a new package and or to other hives?
Um, I mean, certainly a few. I don't think there's a real risk in too much other than you want to make sure that as that new queen has space. You don't want to artificially create a honey-bound situation where you just dump a package into a dead out full of honey. Um, and you want a colony, the population that it can kind of defend itself. You're not creating a robbing situation by putting a bunch of honey in a small unit. But certainly several frames. You could, if you were establishing your package or nuke in a single deep, and you put a full box of honey on top of that. Um, it's probably more than they need, but there's not a lot of harm in it as long as you're aware of like the crowding issue and inducing, you know, that.
And I will just emphasize too that it's really hard to store honey outside of a frame or a hive. So if you've got frames of honey and putting them on bees is the best way to
Mhm.
keep them. So even if it's a little more than they need, at least it gives you a safe place to store it. All right. I'm gonna have Zachary answer this one first because this is a solid I don't know from me, and he is usually good for getting those. So Rebecca says, I've done splitting the past 2 weeks as the weather allows. Welcome to the club. I use a sorting box to put frames into as I'm looking for the queens, which is a nice technique to do. Normally the bees stay on the frames, I'm guessing in the sorting box, but one hive, I had an unusual number of bees leaving the frames and occupying the sides of my sorting box. The hive was well populated and the brood looked reasonable. Should I worry that the bees are trying to tell me something like I have a brood disease? So, Zachary, I don't know if do you have and you're on mute right now, just so you're aware, but do you have a reason why the bees would be like piling off the frames when she put them into a nuke box?
I would say it was a cool day, you're doing it, and sun is shining on the brood box, and the bees will move to the warmer area. If it's 65 outside, that would be my guessing. I don't think it's brood disease they're trying to move away from. So, but would depend on the temperature. I mean, if you did the last 2 weeks, that's what I'll be guessing the reasons. It's never 75 or 80 yet. So bees' optimal temperature is like 95. For nurses, they want 95. So and it's cooler than that. So if sun shining on the box, and they will just move to the warm area. That'll be my guessing. Yeah.
So temperature guess is it? Yeah, that's super valid. Dan or Anna, do you have a guess?
Sounds to me just kind of like when sometimes they get worked up when they're open too long and you're looking for the queen and they just all start running around. I don't know. But I don't know if that's related to anything else. Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
I do. I didn't know. Oh, go ahead, Dan.
I was just say I don't have anything specific other than some colonies are run and are flighty, and there's maybe a genetic component to where some are just super calm on the comb and others are, every which way. So that could be part of it, but yeah.
That's exactly what I was gonna say. And like the term that I've heard used the most is runny bees. And they're really, really sensitive to smoke. So even if they
Mhm.
get a little smoke, they just kind of run away. I have a strong preference for non-runny bees. I don't know that they actually do worse. They're just harder to work as you experienced, and it makes the queen harder to find. I feel like there's a higher chance that you can squish her, but I've always heard that it's genetic. I have had another beekeeper who feels like there's like maybe the bee. You're not the first person to tell me that maybe the bees are trying to tell you something, and I mean we can't rule it out, but I've never heard any or seen any evidence to that. Um, Dan, is there a general rule of thumb as to when to add supers after doing splits?
Um, I mean, generally, I think you want to add more space to a colony when they're occupying two-thirds to three-quarters, 70-ish% of their space. So depending on how big you make your split, you might put a super on almost immediately. If you've made it, 6 frames of bees in a 10-frame box and there's 3 or 4 frames of brood in it, that 6 frames of bees is going to fill that box very quickly as that brood hatches. So, or you're maybe going to be adding a second brood box or whatever you're doing. But as you kind of get to the, three-quarter-ish full on what your brood nest is going to be, adding a super, better too early than too late. Especially with this, it seems like we've had periods of nothing coming in and then it all comes in at once kind of thing. And it's like if you don't have this space on them and you get one of those days like where I was in Lansing Okemos today and the nectar's just pouring in, like you certainly want to have space in advance of that. Um, so there's not a lot of harm in putting them on too early, I guess I would say. This time of year, you're expecting they're going to grow, better a week early than a week late.
And I definitely was putting on some today, but part of it too is a lot of my supers got pretty torn up with the uncapping knife, and it does take them some while to fix stuff too.
Mhm.
So, so like even putting it on and giving, or it's been stored in the garage and they're a little dusty. So getting it on there, because they want it clean and polished before the nectar goes in. And so, like, if it's going to be nice on Saturday, my thought was like, it's cold all week. They got nothing better to do than clean these supers out and getting ready for Saturday. So kind of just preparing. Also, too, Dan or Anna or anybody, how many supers do you tend to put on at a time? Is it always just one?
Um, on On the new units, typically one until I'm seeing that they're established and they're kind of, I'm happy with, okay, Queen's laying and it's all, they're growing nicely. They're doing what they should be doing. I generally give them one initially. The parent colonies that I leave behind, they get generally two to begin with because they're a pretty big population. The way I make most of the splits, they have less brood to look after initially, and they have almost all of the foragers from the colony because they've stayed in that location. Um, so I tend to be a little more generous with those. I will say you could certainly get more. I do that because my bee yards are all fairly close. If I had more travel time, if a bee yard was 40 minutes away, which I do have one that is a little further away, I tend to everybody gets two at a time there just because it's like I know I'm not going to be there on a weekly rotation this time of year, so buy myself a little time with that. But I think two is totally fine. Yeah, probably more if you want. I don't know if because you can always move them within the yard from, colonies that are utilizing. And if you got one, you get two that's got two and they're not utilizing them, you can give that to one that is within the yard. I am a big fan of getting equipment out of the barn this time of year and not much coming back, not offloading, boxes and equipment at the end of the day. So if I'm getting late in the day, I've still got gear on the truck. I'll tend to put it on bees.
That's exactly where I was because I was out for a couple hours before this and then saw it was raining or rain was going to come, which means I'd have to put the supers back inside or cover them on the truck or put them on a beehive. And it was just nicer to get them out there. And so the follow-up question is when you say two at a time, do you mean drawn comb? I was taught you don't add a box until the box below is 60 to 80% drawn. So if you're putting on foundation, do you put less? And that's why I'm glad that Anna and Dan did the differentiation between like the parent hives and the starter hives. And I do that 60 to 80% is really for just those starter hives. And that has really, I've heard this exact scenario really kind of put some people into swarm situations really fast, especially I think in Michigan in particular, where we go from like really cold to just everything coming in, where you can absolutely fill two boxes, you know, in a weekend, or in a week. So like coming up, if we get a nice big black locust bloom, which my prediction is that we won't because we had a huge one last year and a pretty big one the year before. And the real reason why my prediction is that we won't is I finally have bees set up on a really nice black locust yard. So I just jinked it for all of us. But yeah, so if you're drawing out comb and everything you have is foundation, you don't necessarily want to put on, two boxes of foundation. But again, it probably won't hurt. But when you're talking about a big colony, if you wait till everything is 60 to 80% full, like you might have to come out there the next day. All right, so the questions are coming in pretty slowly, but I know we can just talk for hours. So I'll keep an eye on it. But Dan, you talked about making the splits with the mated queens this year. Do you want to just talk about your system of doing splits?
Yeah, so and this is, there's quite a few different ways to make splits. I've done a couple different things, but the most common that I've done is I've gone through generally 3 to 6 days in advance of when I know I'm going to split a yard or at least split the worthy colonies in that yard. And I've put queen excluders between my brood boxes. So most of them are in two deeps. I do have some that ended up in, they got a third brood box coming out of winter. The strong ones, dead outs got stacked on top. Um, and then everything got a super above that 2 to 3 weeks ago. Kind of just before that warm stretch when we got some dandelion coming in, just to try to alleviate some, not wanting nectar coming to the brood nest. Also, when I go back to split, it's an extra box spreads the bees out a little bit, so it's easier to see what's going on. It's easier to find a queen. So what I did is I went through and placed queen excluders through, you know, 3 to 6 days in advance. And then when you come back, you only have eggs in one box. So I don't actually need to lay eyes on the queen. I still generally like to, because that allows me to do some manipulation. I can be more selective on frames if I happen to see the queen. When I'm doing that, I'll put her in a cage, set her on top of the hive or on the open hive, where she's going to stay warm. Um, and then I can go ahead and make whatever I want as the split. But typically, what I'm doing is I'm removing most of the frames of capped brood with the bees on it. You're going to have kind of your young bees that are on that brood, and then leaving the parent colony, leaving that old queen behind with an abundance of drawn, empty comb. I want her to have lots of places to lay. I don't want her to feel like she's getting crowded. She's got nectar coming into the brood nest, or she's got these big sheets of capped brood where she's looking to lay eggs and she's got nowhere to go. That's one of the things that she starts thinking about the colony in general. You start getting, you know, looking towards swarming. If there's congestion, the queen's got less places to lay. So I want her to have a lot of space to lay. Um, and so she's often getting left with like one, maybe two frames of capped brood, the rest of the box empty, come with some food, because you want to have a little insurance that, if the weather does get cold, I don't want to leave them right on the edge of starvation. Um, and then a couple supers on top of that. Some of them I'm adding, um, you know, I'm splitting a double down into a single, and then I'm putting a second box back on that parent colony. I'm taking my split away with most of the young bees and capped brood, and I'm, leaving my old queen with largely just drawn comb. I may add a second box there, a second brood box as well, with some foundation in it. That colony's, got a lot of space. It's got a lot of bees. They should start making some wax, as resources start coming in. And then with that split, I've done most of them in the same within the yard. So some of that is convenience of I'm already going to have to move bees around between yards for setting up different projects, and I don't want to do that too many times. So if I make that split, I've got that box of several frames of capped brood with good bee coverage on it. I tend to overdo it a little on bee coverage because doing it in the same yard, you're going to lose more bees than you think back to that parent location. The bees in that colony, all of the older bees are oriented back to that location. So I set that off in a, new location in the yard, set it down. Um, I will put a queen in, a mated queen the same day. Sometimes just with convenience, if I didn't have the queens with me in the truck, or I've been out on some cold days making splits and I didn't want to babysit the queens. So I've come back and queened them the next morning. Um, it's been a mix of, push-in cages, which is a little metal screen. And you actually release the queen. The first thing you want to do, and this is probably the most labor-intensive way to introduce a queen, but I've found it to be the highest acceptance rate. So what you need to do is find a patch of brood where you have emerging bees. So you can, you're kind of looking closely and you're looking for those cells where you start to see the little chewing and the antennae wiggling around just as those young bees are coming out. And usually, with a queen laying and kind of concentric rings. If you find one or two of them, there's going to be a decent patch there that are all pretty similar in age. So you want to find a patch that has that emerging brood and open comb. Um, so when I find that, I've got my little metal push-in cage. I release the queen under that cage, and to make sure she doesn't fly away, I usually spritz a little bit of sugar syrup on her while she's in the cage. Just a tiny bit, but it's enough to get it on the wings where she's not going to fly away. And then I can let her out from her shipping cage into the push-in cage, and she's going to have those young bees that are just hatching out like today, tomorrow kind of thing to look after her, care for her, groom her. And then she's also got that patch of open comb where she can start laying. And then I typically come back. I like to leave them at least 3 days. I've been as long as five. But typically 3 or 4 days, come back and you can see through the cage. The queen's there. If your eyes are really good, you can usually see eggs down in the cells because she started laying. And then when you lift that cage off, she's quite happy. We've had that slow introduction, um, and she started laying, so there's some pheromone communication going on. And I've had a very high success rate in introducing queens that way. Um, when I don't have that luxury of that much time, I just use the introduction cages with the candy plugs and placing those in the middle in between two frames of brood. It is the springtime. You want to be mindful of temperature. You want to put it where there is definitely going to be good bee coverage. You want, there's a variety of different styles of cages, but they've all got at least one side that's screened. So I don't want to mash that into the comb. Like if I have the little California cages, I point that screen down. Um, and what's going to happen, you have your little candy plug, and over the course of 2, 3 days, the bees are going to chew that candy, that little sugar fondant out of it. And over those couple days that they're essentially getting used to the queen's pheromone. So that's a kind of a slow release introduction as well. So those have kind of been the two primary ways that I've been making splits. I did do a couple demarays because I couldn't find queens. So Megan, you're much more experienced in it than I am, but um, when my first queens come in, I hadn't put excluders through anything, so I was just manually looking through trying to find queens and then make my splits. And there was a couple colonies where I couldn't find the queen, so I did the demaray, which if you want to talk, Megan, on the finer points of that, or
Yeah, and also Dan, you did get a wow, nice job, Dan, coming through. So, which is true. Like it's luxurious for us to have the time to just actually talk through the process with all the details. So I did put a little handout in the chat that I had just like whipped up before a talk this spring because I knew I'd have questions on it. And there's two processes outlined in it. One is one that I can't take credit for either of these. These are things that were taught to me, but one of them is one where you just do every other frame. So it's a really nice method for people who are not super confident for making splits. And then the other one is the modified demaray, which I use. And so in that one, it's exactly like the scenario is what Dan was describing. Like if you can't find the queen or you don't want to find the queen, you can shake all the bees down to the bottom box. Well, I do rearrange the bottom box in the way that I'm going to leave it, which is usually 2 frames of brood, lots of empty space for the queen to lay, honey on the outside. So that bottom box is really like what I'm leaving for the mated queen. And then I shake all the bees down. And then this year I've been putting a box of foundation on top of that because I want to draw out more deeps. And then a queen excluder, and then a honey super, and then all of the capped brood goes above that. And the reasoning that I do it this way at this time of year is I can do that whole shaking, rearranging on nice days like today. And then on cold days, I can move that top box and I can add in a mated queen, or I can add in a queen cell, or I can allow them to raise up a queen themselves. And so it gives you lots of options to do that. So there is a question. It says, is it best to use the push-in cage over emerging brood? And I see Dan nodding, which that is the case. I will say that I first started learning pushing cages from Zachary. So I didn't use them until I worked for Zachary back in 2012. And so and I agree there is the nicest. But if you put them right over emerging brood, it does allow those brood to hatch out and they accept her immediately because she's the only mom they've ever known. And then she has a nice place to lay. Anna, there's a question about honey in here. And it says, is it possible for honey from a dead out to ferment while sitting in the barn? If so, can bees still use it?
Yes, it's possible. It's going to depend on the moisture content, but it's definitely possible for honey to ferment in the barn. I'd also have lots of other concerns with storing capped honey in the barn right now, because it could be vulnerable to all other kinds of pests. And a lot of times our honey frames also have pollen in them, and that can be really attractive to rodents. So, it, it it's ideal if I think if you can get the honey onto some colonies, because then if it is still a little bit high in moisture, they can work on drying it out, or they can also just kind of protect those frames from pests. As far as whether or not they'll eat fermented honey, my understanding is they avoid it. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Megan?
So I think I don't know how I don't know if I would put fermented honey in a hive. It is one of the
Oh,
things yeah.
sorry. I thought I was thinking about like honey that they thought could ferment. I wasn't saying
Oh,
ferment. Thank you.
yeah. I think, yeah, it is one of those things because I have had it happen where the honey has fermented from and like, I never found a solution of what to do with it besides throwing it away, which feels wasteful, but I just don't, I mean, I guess you could bury it. But like, if it is actually fermented, and it's in a frame that's been in a barn, I just don't like it's not good for humans or bees. It's just one of those things that didn't go well. And I kind of made the comment quickly before that there's really not a good place besides on beehives to store honey. So besides the freezer, if you had the space, but freezer and on a hive is really kind of the only two places. I have no other good solutions for storing honey in frames. Or on a store shelf if it's not fermented, you sell it. But like really, if it's in a frame, it's hard to sell. Anna, I'm going to give you another one because I know you've been dealing with a lot of queen issues. So a person caught a swarm and installed it into a weak or queenless hive, but then it says with today's inspections, both hives appear queenless. I think maybe they mean the whole hive appears queenless. No eggs are queen, but good amounts of bees, capped brood, and larvae. There were also several capped queen cells in both. Should I worry about letting them requeen themselves with the cooler temps and rain? My concern would be successful. Oh, I think maybe I caught my own swarm. So I think they caught their swarm out of their strong hive and put it into their weaker hive. And now both hives have queen cells. And then there's a concern about the successful mating flights with the cool weather coming up.
Yeah, and just to clarify, Megan, when she said the queen issues, she means I told her that I've been getting a lot of questions from people with queen issues.
I
Not
assume
that,
you solved them quite well.
no. All right. So we might need a little group participation here because I'm not sure
Yeah.
I've totally got my head around the
Okay.
situation.
I'll do it step by step for you.
Okay.
Okay. So I think we covered the swarm management and swarm control that next year this person will do on their strong hive so that they don't get the swarm. Do you maybe want to talk about another thing they could do next year when they catch a swarm, besides putting it into a hive that has the choice of putting it into an existing hive first?
Yeah, so normally when we catch swarms, we put them into their own box. I also have really good success. We have multiple bee yards, which is nice, but I have really good success of moving that swarm then to a new bee yard location and not having them leave the hive. Um, So if you wanted to boost that weaker colony, what I would do is if this happens again next year, is put the swarm in its own hive, wait a while, and then combine them later. So I think one of the issues that I think we're thinking may ha have happened is you had a colony, a swarm that maybe had a queen, maybe had multiple queens. You put it in a box with a weaker colony, and maybe there was some fighting, and you ended up without a queen in that combination.
Yeah, and so there's queen cells in both. And I like how the only question is should I worry? So, but maybe talk about like maybe the timeline and what to expect and what you would do.
Yeah, and I do sometimes see like kind of like fake queen cells. Sometimes if a colony is queenless, sometimes they build bigger cells, and then once you poke in them, there's not really a queen developing. It's just like they were trying something even though they didn't have an option. So I don't know about that colony, but um if it was a weaker colony but queen right, wait, no, the weaker colony was queenless. That's where I'm Weaker colony was queenless. So yeah, we don't know if it has a queen, but we know it has something that looks like queen cells. I don't know if you have another colony, but what I would do is take a frame of eggs from another colony and give it to the colonies that you think might be queenless, and then check back in a few days. And then if you have queen cells on those frames, then you are likely queenless. And if you don't have queen cells on those frames, um, oh my gosh, I'm like talking myself in circles because they think they're queenless, so they'd still have.
So yeah, and I think one of the confusing things here is if you put a swarm into a hive that's queenless, you wouldn't also have queen cells. So I think that's what you're because if it was queenless, they wouldn't have anything to make the queen cells. So I
Thank
think
you.
your confusion is totally correct. So something in this scenario is not maybe recorded correctly. So one very clear thing is that hive wasn't actually queenless. The one that was weaker, it might have already swarmed, and maybe there was a virgin in there and you missed her. And when you dumped that package in, they killed her. Another option is that maybe they were queenless and you dumped the queen in there and they killed her. And what you're seeing are fake cells, but they're actually laying workers. Because that's another thing too, is they'll draw out stuff that looks like cells. So it is a situation where like you wouldn't necessarily have it would be weird to drop a queen in there and then immediately have queen cells. So probably something got missed, which is totally legitimate that something got missed.
It's a
Um,
good question, and you can also feel free to follow up with Ask Extension, especially after your subsequent inspections and as you have more information. And I will say, like, this is the part of beekeeping that is sometimes really frustrating, but also really interesting, right? Where we have these weird cases and we're trying to piece together what the bees are actually doing.
and I think so. First off, for the main question of whether or not you should worry, the answer is no. Um, because it's either fine and everybody's just going to requeen themselves, or it's not fine, but you really can't do anything. Like it is just going to happen the way it happens and it will work out. The one thing that you can do is take good notes about the dates that you're seeing everything, especially like when the last time you saw a cat brood in there or how old the brood was, because that'll help you calculate when that queen is going to emerge and then when she's going to go out on mating flights and then when she's going to come back. And the biggest thing the question that I get all the time, like that'll be over the next month, is people saying that they're queenless and then they're not because they checked too early. So one of two things is going to happen. Either they're going to go laying worker, which means you've got a box of workers and you can do a newspaper combine, or the queen comes back and is totally fine, in which case you don't have to worry. But those two things are, and then at that point you'll know how it worked out. But if you do a lot of digging in there too early when they're trying to requeen, that's the one thing you can do is mess up the process. Dan or Zachary, do you want to weigh in on this one?
Yeah, I find the timeline kind of strange. Yeah, so that's what you should not do, is to catch a swarm and put it into another colony. I've let the swarm, because the swarm is probably more vulnerable because the bees are not totally settled down and not going to protect the queen. And if you have a laying worker colony, they tend to be aggressive toward another queen. And so that would be a very easy way to get the queen killed. Even if you let the swarm settle for 2 days, 2 or 3 days, and newspaper combined with the laying worker will be even safer. The best way is just to shake that one in front of, if you have two colonies, shake them in front of two different colonies. So that way you weaken the force of the laying workers. Because if they are comparable, then the laying workers will win and you will lose a queen. So it has to be like 30% to 70% to be sure, to be safe. So that the laying work colony has to be only 30% of the bees when you dump them to a larger colony. But if it's like, 40, 60 or half and half, then you risk losing another queen. And especially with the swarm, that's more vulnerable, I think. So
Yeah,
now
and
you know.
Zachary's talking about shaking out the box that was queenless, not the swarm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that is I mean, it is a good question because there are definitely there are a lot of people who are experiencing both the catching of the swarms and potential queenless hives and hives that have already swarmed too. So it was a very good question in that it encompassed a lot of different topics right now. So we don't have anything else in the chat. I don't know if anyone of this group wants to talk maybe about what we're going to do over the next couple of weeks.
No questions about flowers?
You did a very good coverage of that. I would have a request for a photo for June though, or at least a couple. There is a question about will the queen go on mating flights if the weather is in the 50s? So Zachary, do you know the minimum temperature that queens will go out on mating flights?
I don't know, but I'll be guesstimating 65. I'll be guessing. Because
Yeah.
if the worker's not foraging, the queen is probably not going to get out. Yeah. So and
Yeah.
65 is about the minimum temperature the bees will venture out. And because if some bees are brave at 60, but the flowers are not producing nectar, so then you have, as you go out, there's nothing. They're not releasing pollen, they're not producing nectar if it's too cold. So it's like two factors. Not only the bees, and some like bumblebees will fly at 60 because they have lower temperature tolerance. They have better temperature tolerance, but they're probably not as picky as honeybees because it's that little bit of nectar and pollen. They don't store. They're not like that. They're not like honeybees. Are nectar holders trying to prepare winter. So they have different behaviors, different strategies. So I think honeybees will just stay home in the summer. In the spring, in Michigan spring, if it's below 65, I think chances are queens won't fly out. Yeah. And also it depends what the drones are out there also. The drones might be lazier. They might need warmer temperature to get out.
They are bigger, but I feel, yeah. Then there's a question, and I will say, like personally, I have not started queen rearing this year, and I also used mated queens this year, which is I almost rarely or never do, but well, part of it is because my field schedule is about to get wild, and then also because It just has been so cold, and so I haven't started queen rearing yet, but probably Saturday if the 10-day forecast looks like. So there's a question about but I mean, if you did walk away splits or you're trying, I have started because really, like, you have to think about the weather 2 weeks out. So Michelle asks how long a virgin can stay in the hive due to cold before going out on a mating flight. And, it's going to be 6 days before she's optimally ready to go out. And then the standard response that I have always heard is like 2 weeks. But I also know people that have put it to the test and kept her for much longer and are still able to get her mated. But you do have a window of a few weeks in there where she is able to stay before she becomes, an unmated drone worker, or unmated drone layer is the word in English. Anna, where's everyone at in mite treatments? And Dan?
Yeah, so I think for a lot of our colonies, we're waiting for them to get bigger in population to do some of our treatments. I was with Dan on campus. He installed some package colonies, and so that offers a really nice opportunity where we had a broodless period. So he tried out the 8B bioaxle ready to use solution for the package colonies before there was capped broods. I don't know if Dan, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah. So the apibioxyl is a new oxalic acid treatment. It's RTU ready to use. And it's a liquid with the oxalic pre-mixed ready to go. You can get it in smaller quantities, but I got a 5 liter jug with it's really nicely set up. I'm a big fan of when manufacturers make things that are very practical, the usability on mite treatments. When something new comes out, it's always like, well, does this work? Does this do, what does it do to the mites? What does it do to the bees? But also, as a beekeeper, how hard or easy is this product to apply? So, initial impression was very positive. And so, like Anna said, with a package, oxalic acid is a great thing to be in kind of your mite management playbook, but it does not kill mites underneath the cappings. When you have a package of bees, whether you're dumping them onto foundation or drawn comb, you're going to be, it's going to be 10 days after install before your queen has any capped brood at all. So you have that window to get a mite treatment on when any mites that are in that colony are exposed to that treatment. There's nowhere for them to hide as far as a capping to hide under. So when I did my check back, just to check that the queens had been accepted, seeing eggs and that, and I filled up the syrup bucket for the second time. That was an ideal time to put on this apibioxyl treatment. So I was, one go around here this spring, but new product on the market, and my initial impression has been very positive. I've used oxalic acid as a dribble before, but that's mixing it up myself in a sugar water solution, and there's issues with that getting it, getting all the oxalic to dissolve and that. So I was pretty happy to see a ready to use product come on the market.
And I have not put anything in yet, except for research I have. So we have a trial going right now looking at Apivar 2.0, Baroxan, Naroa, the dribble method with the OA, and then nothing, I think, is the fifth one. Yes, 250 colonies in Michigan and then 250 colonies in North Dakota. We're trying those. So we are looking into doing it's something that you do when you're doing splits. These were splits that were done with queen cells though. So the Naroa and the OA dribble went in at the time of the queen cells. I've just been hanging on by a thread this spring, so I don't have it together to do any treatments, but what Dan said is I kind of went out and today I was doing checkbacks and making sure all the queens that I installed got released. All the ones I do have some that are making up their own queens, and all the parents are still there. And then making sure everyone is big enough. And my next trip out will be with putting on honey supers and putting in formic is my plan. And that'll happen before our next meeting for sure. So
I guys seen drones yet? I was just wondering, was the weather so weird? Probably no
I've
drone, no
I
capsule.
have so many drones,
Yeah,
but
they're
because they started early,
yeah.
Because that warm period, that was
that
first it was
Mhm.
unseasonably warm, now it's unseasonably cold. That's Michigan. Yeah.
Well, Keith says it's normal. So
And when you average it
yeah,
out, it's normal, but right now it's below normal. But
yeah,
3 weeks ago it was above normal.
yeah,
Yeah. So, but then the averages are, but average doesn't help bees probably or plants. They get all messed up. Yeah.
yeah. Anna, do you want to answer the question? Oh, Keith, did you want to comment on that?
No, no, I was just checking in case there was a question here. So
I don't see any more weather questions at the moment. I think we've got two more really nice ones to end on. So Anna, there's a question that says about testing for mites in packages. So the way that this is worded is after installing packages, have you ever put a mite board in and checked the mite drop for those bees? Would it be worth doing to see what you have regarding a mite issue? I think also just maybe talk about mites in packages, both looking at them and what you would do.
Yeah, so I mean, it's that's not something we did when we did the recent installation. I think if you're curious about it, it's something that you could do. Just put a sticky board underneath that in that package colony after you hive it, and then if you do a treatment, you could see what the mite drop is. It might be a little bit interesting to you just to know your starting point, and it might vary by package colony from colony to colony. However, for the most part, normally when we are trying to monitor varroa mites, we're taking a sample of 300 bees and doing an alcohol wash test or maybe a powdered sugar roll test to approximate the number of mites. It can be pretty challenging to just use the sticky boards for estimating the mite population. And then if we were to have done it in this case, we'd still have questions about whether or not how much the treatment played a role in it too. So we could see how many mites were on the bottom board, but we wouldn't know if our mite number was actually higher and it was just the treatment that was less effective. So sticky boards give us some information, but they don't normally tell us the full picture.
And then there's one last interesting question. It says, if a newly purchased queen is only laying drone eggs after 14 days, will she later start laying worker eggs, or was she not mated, sterilized in transit, or other? So the sad part is that she is not going to start laying workers. The happy part is that it is really fun to dissect queens to look for the spermatheca. So it's pretty easy to do, and you can just pull off the last segment and see if you can find the spermatheca, and you can confirm that she wasn't mated because it'll be like crystal clear. It'll look like this little crystal ball. Of course, if she was mated, you can't put it back together. That's too far gone, but it is a really interesting thing to do to confirm. But it means she was not properly mated.
If you don't want to dissect her, you can put her in the freezer and give her to Zach for one of his anatomy and dissection workshops. And you will then at least know that that queen has a bigger purpose, serving a
Yes. And
Yeah, we have a dissection in 20 days, 25 days.
yeah, so there
Yeah.
will be, and you could join Zachary's anatomy workshop at the Heartland Apicultural. I will say that Anna and Dan saved old queens for us to dissect. I teach a honeybee medicine class at the vet school, and they like when the students saw the spermathecal net around it, like it got legitimate oohs and ahs. Like it was pretty cool. So it is very, very nice. All right. Um,
But
there,
one possibility is, so if you do see the spermatheca and still it has clouded inside, then that means the queen during the shipping was chilled or something. But usually, if it's a chilled queen, you would have some mixed brood, some spawns are still viable. I did have
yeah,
that happened to me once. I had half of my packages I release the queen right away, and half I give them sugar, punch the hole, and it was very cold. And that's the year when Jianku Li was here. We did together, and then the other half we had mixed brood. So the queen was chilled, were in the cage where the bees are not clustering around her, and it was very cold at night. So the queen was chilled, and then half of the spawn are killed. So we had mixed brood, half drone, half worker in the worker cells. So usually that doesn't produce 100% drones, if that's the case. So yeah.
yeah, exactly. All right. Well, thank you everyone for your attention and for your wonderful questions. Hopefully we'll see you all at the Heartland meeting. I'm really looking forward to it because I haven't gotten to like have one with hands-on classes in a while. So I think it's going to be really fun. There's also going to be an ice cream social, and lots of other fun things. So hopefully we'll see you all there. And then if you can't make it soon after, we'll see you at the um, June office hours. So thanks everyone and have a great night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Uh,
Good night.
and I